Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever looked at a wild, untamed forest, or maybe a bustling coral reef, and just thought, wow, this is absolute chaos? I mean, it's literally a jungle out there. But scientists actually have a brilliant way of making sense of all this madness. They don't just see a random assortment of animals and plants scattered about, they see an architectural blueprint. So today, we're exploring exactly how nature builds its own power structures from the ground up, turning the wild chaos of the natural world into a highly organized grid of energy. Okay, let's dive into this. So, ecological pyramids. These are incredibly informative tools that we use to visualize the relationships between organisms at different trophic levels in an ecosystem. Think of it kind of like mapping out nature's wild tangle of life into a clean, easy-to-read geometric shape, just like a real pyramid you'd see in Egypt, right? These ecological diagrams start really wide at the base and then taper off as you get to the top. They're essentially our way of instantly seeing who relies on whom to survive. Here's the agenda for today's tour of nature's blueprints. First, we'll look at nature's architectural blueprint. Then, we'll be counting the pyramid of numbers and weighing the biomass pyramid. After that, we'll explore the unshakable energy pyramid, and finally, we'll wrap up with flaws in the design. All right, let's start with Section 1, Nature's Architectural Blueprint. So, let's build this pyramid level by level. Down at Step 1, the absolute rock-solid foundation of our structure, we have the producers. These are your plants on land and your phytoplankton in the water. They're the incredible organisms pulling off the daily miracle of creating energy directly from the sun through photosynthesis. And frankly, without this wide, strong foundation, the whole building just collapses. Moving up to Step 2, we run into the consumers, the herbivores and carnivores that are driving the energy transfer. And then finally, perched right up at the very top in Step 3, we have the top-level predators, the apex. It's a highly logical progression, really, moving from the sun catchers down at the bottom all the way up to the apex hunters at the peak. Moving on to Section 2, counting the pyramid of numbers. So the crucial point is the sheer scale required at the bottom just to support the top. The pyramid of numbers simply counts the organisms at each level. Just notice how a standard grassland ecosystem requires literal millions of individual plants just to act as the foundation. And those millions of plants, they support a much smaller number of herbivores, which in turn sustain an even smaller population of carnivores. There's a striking, absolutely massive decline in sheer numbers as you ascend the pyramid. I mean, it literally takes a crowd of millions to support just a handful of individuals at the apex. Which brings us to Section 3, weighing the biomass pyramid. Usually, when we measure the total mass of living matter, what we call biomass, we get that traditional upright pyramid shape, fewer organisms, less total mass at the top. But aquatic ecosystems introduce a massive plot twist here. In the ocean, the pyramid physically flips upside down. No way, right? But the biomass of fish can actually surpass the biomass of the tiny phytoplankton they consume. The thing is, the phytoplankton reproduce and get eaten so incredibly fast that at any given snapshot in time, the sheer weight of the fish outweighs the weight of the producers that are keeping them alive. It's wild. Let's look at Section 4, the unshakable energy pyramid. As the literature notes, this pyramid is always upright, emphasizing that energy diminishes as it moves up each level. And this is exactly why this specific blueprint is the unshakable one. Unlike numbers or biomass, the energy pyramid tracks the actual power grid of the ecosystem. And it never ever inverts. Why? Well, because energy is constantly lost in a system. You simply cannot have more energy at the top floor than you started with at the ground level. It's just a fundamental rule. And this brilliantly illustrates the dramatic drop-off. You start with the highest level, the producers, just bursting with energy, which is measured annually per unit area, by the way. But as that energy transfers to the primary consumers, and then again to the secondary consumers, there's a massive, unavoidable reduction. The absolute critical takeaway here is that energy is lost as heat during each and every single transfer between trophic levels. So by the time you get up to the top predator, only a tiny, tiny fraction of that original solar energy from the base actually remains. And that leads us to our final stop, Section 5, flaws in the design. But is nature really this simple? I mean, we love our neat geometric shapes and our clear-cut levels, but let's pull the rug out for a second and shatter that illusion. We've constructed this perfect model of orderly steps, going from producers straight up to apex predator. However, if you've ever spent any actual time observing the natural world, you probably suspect that life rarely behaves like a perfect triangle, right? So here's exactly where the model breaks down. First off, organisms often occupy multiple levels simultaneously. Take the humble sparrow. When a sparrow eats seeds, it's acting as a primary consumer, but the very next minute when it snatches up an insect, it becomes a secondary consumer. It completely ignores our neat architectural boundaries. Second, these pyramids simplify incredibly complex food webs into linear, single-filed chains. And honestly, that just doesn't reflect the true tangled complexity of who eats whom in nature. And perhaps the most glaring flaw of the whole shebang? Crucial decomposers like saprophytes are entirely ignored by these models. The very organisms responsible for nutrient cycling and, cleaning up the entire system don't even get their own floor on the pyramid. Ultimately, models definitely help us understand the world, but nature absolutely refuses to fit into perfect geometric boxes. Ecological pyramids give us a fantastic foundational grasp of energy flow, of population numbers, and of living mass. But the real beauty of biology is its messiness. It really begs the question, as our understanding of complex, tangled ecosystems deepens, will we eventually need to abandon the pyramid altogether for a completely new shape of nature?